Hello, I'm Jennifer of Jen and Coco, and today let's get some world building done. Favorite mugs of hot chocolate ready today? Because today we are going to be doing um, some world building in honor of Earth Day. So I figured it's Earth Day today. What a better day than to do some world building and Earth building, as it may be. Then actually, that's what we're going to start with. Actually, before we go to that, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I do want to say I have been wrong on the internet. Shock and awe. I do not claim to be an expert. I hope I make that very clear. But a few things. I know when I was talking about syntax in the first episode of this whole series, I believe I said that this is going to be head initial language, which is correct. I do want this to be a head initial language. However, I said that head initial languages tend to have the object before the verb, and that is not true. I got that mixed up. So right now, we're probably going to be looking at SVO language. We'll look more at that later. Today, we're not focusing a whole lot on grammar and the conlang. We're going to be looking at a lot more world building. I just want to get a few things cleared up. The other things I wanted to get cleared up, I believe is on the verbs, yes. I was looking, and it looked like the idea I had, and this may have been, I don't know if I said this out loud or if I was just thinking it, but I think the idea I had for what's going to happen with the present perfective and the present iterative is close to the simulfactive and the simul-iterative. I may not be 100% right on the exact use of those terms, but it puts the right idea in my mind, and that's simply of the, and the simulfactive being the knowing that something happened just a specific instance of one time out of potentially many, which kind of fits with that whole imperfective, unmarked vibe I think that we have. I'm not going to look more into this right now, but this does give us a lot to work with when we come back to verbs in the future. And we will be definitely working more on verbs because I want to add in some more modality and mood stuff into these as well than I currently have right here. So we're going to come back and we're going to really hit verbs later. But that is a later thing. Today, Earth Day, we're working on some geography, I blanked on all the other ology words for flora and fauna, but flora and fauna, there. So yeah, let's start with some of the basic geology stuff, some of the basic geographical features of the area. So we're working with our Venus Medusa race here, which, as a refresher for those who have not been, who have either forgotten or have not been paying attention to the series so far, and this is your first time, which in that case, hello, thank you for joining, welcome. We have a humanoid race that have essentially Venus flytraps for hair. That is the quick elevator pitch description. The longer description is that they come from a swampy area akin to where I grew up, my hometown, Wilmington, where Venus flytraps are native. And that's where they grew up. And as a way, since it is a swampy area, as a way of getting around the annoyingness of the high bug populations in the area, particularly flying ones, these people there started putting, way back when, Venus flytraps in their hair as a way to just help take away some of the annoyance. Kind of following a gnat's. If you've ever been in a swarm of gnats, you may have noticed, I have tended to notice this with some experimentation from friends, but they tend to go towards the highest spot. Which I will say, if you ever are in a cloud of gnats and you have a bunch of friends around you, tell that and watch them all for the rest of the day hold their hands up above their head, just trying to keep the gnats up there. It does work to a certain extent. It's not perfect, but I mean, the gnats will go to the highest point of you. Whether that's fact or an old wives' tale, I don't know, but it feels like it's a real thing. But going back, so that's kind of why they put the Venus flytraps on their hair, in their hair. One, as a way to just kind of raise them up a little bit, and two, to also give the Venus flytraps food, because Venus flytraps are carnivorous plants, so they would eat. Now, not gnats. Gnats would probably be too small, and like those sort of bugs, but we're going to say that they are much larger bugs that are being annoying in this world, and that there are lots of them. Probably closer to what you would expect of the fly and mosquito swarms up in, like in the Minnesota, Canada boundary waters, where in the summertime after dark, it is just swarms of black flies or mosquitoes everywhere. So something kind of more like that. So way back when, these people started putting the Venus flytraps in their hair, and we've progressed to the point where they're a symbiotic species. I have still yet to decide whether or not they're symbiotic to the point where they're kind of one species, and essentially humans are now born with them, or are born with these Venus flytraps in their hair or not. There's some things I want to figure out about exactly how interconnected they are. Because I have a couple ideas of how this could work. And actually, let's go ahead and just walk over here. We'll make I'll just make a note of culture. I'm going to move this to another document in the future because this is largely going to be a geography page, I think. We'll see. But culture stuff. There's two ways I can kind of see it. One, let's go. Well, we still need culture. But we also need ideas. Our ideas drawing board. So our first thing, if options for being born with or without Venus flytraps on head. If they are not born with it, then you can get this kind of coming-of-age ceremony where either a coming-of-age or a birth ceremony, or a kind of a life ceremony, where you are paired with your Venus flytrap, which would be kind of a cool thing. It would also mean that to a certain extent, if we have other normal humans in this world, which that's one thing I'm still trying. I have some ideas for, I think, the larger world, and I think I want to slowly. I think that's one goal, is I want to make this into a larger world, but we're still going to stick small for the beginning, or at least with our scope. So, if they are born without it on their, or without the Venus flytraps on their head, if they are born still mostly like a normal human, then that would mean that you would have either a coming of age or a life ritual, depending on whether it was done close to birth or close to, or later in life, would determine which of those types of ceremonies would be. You would also have probably rituals concerning care and maintenance, like adding in dirt to your hair potentially or soil, and maintenance of that. So you would have kind of those sort of ritualistic things that might come about, or even just daily life. Be kind of just as normal as brushing your teeth is to us, or drinking hot chocolate is to me. So that's one idea, and that is, so we'll kind of go with if not born with VF, then numerous options for rituals, for significant and daily rituals. First being paired with the VF, care and maintenance, etc. If they are born with Venus flytraps in there, actually, hold on, let's go back to, so let's not leave the if they're not born first. So if they're not born with Venus flytraps, that also means that the other humans in the area could potentially join this culture and not be at too much of a disadvantage. I definitely want there to be a distinct biological or physiological difference between people of this culture that have, for generations, probably millennia now, been putting Venus flytraps on their head. But for the most part, I think, but if they're not born, I think I kind of do want to have a way of, you could have this kind of assimilation process for foreigners, kind of like a citizenship. But you could have like a assimilation ritual, even. If still physiologically similar to humans, I put an asterisk there because that's assuming that regular humans exist in this world. We are talking about humanoid creatures to begin with. We haven't really set up a whole lot of this world yet, so this is what we're doing right now. Still says physiologically similar to humans, and an assimilation. Thank you, autocorrect. That's not a phrase I say often. An assimilation ritual could be conceivable. And should probably not jump in with words I can't always automatically spell. I think I did pretty well, though. What are you saying over here? Okay. If not born with Venus flytraps on their head, then numerous options for significant and daily rituals, such as numerous exist. E.g. Okay. However, if born with them, then that means you now have a distinctly different species. You have a distinctly different species from humans. And this could mean a few things, none of which are coming to my head off the top of my head. So yes, this could mean a few things. Besides the obvious, they are a distinctly different species. Kind of their understanding of the world, I would imagine, would be slightly different. You would also have the idea, and you'd also have to figure out I'd also be curious as to what exactly the physiological changes are. And how are these, because clearly if these two species have grown together to the point where essentially the Venus flytraps on the head are no longer breeding themselves, they are breeding with the host human. Essentially, they have become like the mitochondria almost in a way, that they've just become permanently attached to the human. And it does allow for some more options, because it allows for, if the Venus flytraps are placed on their head, that does produce an odd burden, which I'm very aware of and have been very aware of, was this. If you kind of have this balancing act you have to do for the rest of your life, if you want to maintain this plant culture on your head. Whereas if you are now born with this species, if you've interlinked, it is possible that something has come where it is attached to you permanently. It is like your hair. It may have even replaced your hair and replaced the hair of these people in some way, which I think I've mentioned that on previous episodes, talking about the possibility of that. But that would also mean that you could potentially get manes or other, it could essentially spread away from just the top of your head and become, essentially, imagine my hair, but a main of it just going down. It's all Venus flytraps. So you get options for, you have a lot more option for diversity of the actual Venus flytraps. Plus, you have the potential for, once he does it, just have it. Digga-digga-doo. I'll remember that thought when I have it. Plus, you have the option for more. So on top of the diversity, you have the option to do more. Wow, I'm really blanking right now. Oh, I don't know if this was where I was going with this, but one thing that could happen. Well, one thing that could happen is that okay, I am not a. I have not studied a whole lot of anatomy or botany or biology. I have a lot of friends who have. That has not have been my pursuit of research. So I'm aware something like this is highly unlikely. But I still think it's cool. I still think the idea of these two species combining into essentially one species, I think would be super cool. And going to the physiological things, there are some ways that I could see this slowly happening over time. Essentially, the hair on the head becoming able to hold soil in more easily. Eventually, the Venus flytraps getting to the point where their roots burrow into the people themselves, which I imagine would be not a pleasant sensation for the first few people, but it could be something where they kind of co-evolves. And essentially that's kind of the process I see to where they start becoming integrated and their DNAs start becoming intertwined. And I think this is the weird part, is the fact that you have... It's how does the DNA of these Venus flytraps become intertwined with the DNA of these humans? To the point where the humans are now the source of breeding for these Venus flytraps. It's a little bit peculiar, I admit. That one I don't know on yet. Yeah. That one I have no idea how that would happen. Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities there. I'm not sure that that's where I'm ready to explore quite yet, because that is a very different question, I feel like. So, just at a quick glance, just from a few things I've said so far, if they're not born with Venus flytraps on their heads, it provides me more options for immediate cultural world building. But I think it's overall a smaller door to work with. I think I want to go with this being a distinctly different species, that they're born with the Venus flytraps on their head, where they have co-evolved to become this new species. Almost like lichen, I guess? Lichen's the only other dual species I know of off the top of my head. It's also the only dual species I know of. It's the only dual species I can think of. And the only one I think that is actually across two different clades, because it's a fungus and a plant. It's a fungus and a moss, I was going to say. So it's a fungi and plant. Whereas we have plant and animal here. Just we have a sentient animal being our host. So I do think I want to go with that they are just born. This is a distinct and different species, and not just a cultural thing that's happened. Well, it was cultural at one point. Now it's life. So yes, born with Venus flytraps, distinctly different species. Whether or not they are compatible with humans in the same way that lions and tigers are? I don't know yet. We'll put that down. We'll go back to, so, with these people being a distinctly different species, so some things I do know is like kind of like, I think are some ideas of how I've had, of how these people have evolved. Whether or not this is what I go with finally, but just kind of is up for debate. But just kind of some ideas that their hair eventually started becoming becoming more and more habitable for holding soil and such. The Venus flytraps eventually made their roots in a way that essentially became part of the human skin, and probably in a way that either didn't mess with their brain or became part of their brain, so they became a single thinking organism. Thinking in the way, it's an odd way to put it with Venus with the plants, but I think you know what I mean with that, or I hope you know what I mean with that. Of essentially having a direct neurological attachment to the brain in a non-harmful fashion. Oh, that gives me an idea. I should actually see if that is the case. If there is the direct location onto the top of the brain, I should see there's either two things that might come with that. And I think one of them is slightly more realistic, or more likely, of either you start seeing a new layer of the brain form that is essentially control with the Venus flytraps, or you see whatever parts of the brain are up there get linked to control or connection with the Venus flytrap. So I need to see, like, if it's the emotional parts of the brain, that'd be kind of a cool thing. Although I don't think that's where the emotional parts of the brain are. The third option is the tendrils just grow into the brain, become one with it, and connect into the parts of the brain that I find most interesting-wise, whether that's motor functions or emotions or something like that. But essentially, that would mean if they're tied into emotions, you could kind of get this cool, you could kind of get the... Okay, let me rephrase this. What I'm imagining is a dog wagging its tail sort of thing, or even most modern depictions of Medusa, where the snakes kind of respond to Medusa's emotional state or feelings. That probably doesn't have to be attached straight to your emotion center or cores of your brain, your amygdala and such. I don't remember if that's exactly what the amygdala does, but I know it does have some stuff to do with emotions. I don't remember what exactly. That's something I definitely need to do some research on too, is brain shape. Boom. Okay. Other things, though. Yeah. And then over time, more, it could grow over other parts of the body, down to their shoulders, going down their back, kind of like a mane. So you kind of get some more options with that. And I think I like those more stylistic options. And those could present their own cultural options of there being kind of a status of being born with more surface area covered by Venus flytraps, or specific patterns, whether it's on the shoulders but not down the back, or vice versa, or both, or the size of the plants themselves on top of your head, or just the number of plants themselves on top of you. There are some cool status things that I think that come with that. So let me add on these notes real quick of check. Depending on root system of flytraps. Depending on the root system, you could get interaction with different interactions with brain. The other thing I was just talking about was cultural status symbols based on Venus flytrap. Based on Venus flytraps. Location, number, size, etc. Almost in a way, and I don't imagine that to be a huge part of the culture. I'm kind of expecting it to be some more of a... It's not going to be like the whole culture, the whole social hierarchy is based around your plumage, as it were. It's going to be more something like beards today. That's probably actually a good way to put it. Like beards or even hair today, of saying having long hair means something, having a full, thick beard means something, a curly mustache means something else, having neck scruff all over means something entirely different. So kind of those sort of things, as far as kind of like how we treat most physiological differences nowadays, of even to the extent of height and weight. Okay, maybe not weight. Well, definitely height. I don't think it'll go as extreme as, say, skin color is treated in our modern day society. If I was to go that far, I believe that would be more of the difference between species, between, say, humans and Venus Medusa. That's a story for a different day. That's not something I'm going to wade into right now. But let's go on to talking about our actual geography here. So, with our geography, we have a few options. Actually, no, wait, no, let me back that up. So I have a few ideas in my head of I'm really basing the starting location of this species to be very similar to my hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina, where I've repeatedly mentioned that Venus flytraps come from, and are native to. And the reason for that is the things that create carnivorous plants. You need, I don't know a whole lot about evolutionary stuff, but one thing I do know you need is nutrient-poor soil. Because carnivorous plants still photosynthesize like normal plants. Which, to the benefit of the humans, means that essentially that means that the Venus flytraps won't be drawing a lot of nutrients from them. And actually there might be a nice balance of that, of getting free nutrients from the photosynthesis of the Venus flytraps on them. And so you kind of get that nice symbiosis of a kind of a nice balance of things, which also would mean that, if there is that trade between trade of resources and nutrients between the human and the Venus flytrap, that does create a small issue with my initial concept of this, but I'll get back to that. So, carnivorous plants are still photosynthetic. They turn light into food, into nutrients. However, they cannot rely on their root systems to provide the nutrients that they need. I believe it's nitrate or nitrogen and phosphorus. I think it's nitrogen and phosphorus. I could be slightly wrong on those. I'm almost certain on nitrogen, or I want to say nitrate, but something with nitrogen in it, and something else. But they can't rely on the soil to provide those things for them. So that is why they turn toward to become carnivorous, because eating things that were hapless enough to fall into their traps was a more secure way to procure the nutrients that they couldn't get from the soil. So going back, that's why I mentioned that if there is the balance of nutrients between the Venus flytraps and the humans, almost incentivizes the Venus flytraps to not be carnivorous anymore because there's no longer a need, in a way. There may still be, so it could potentially, over time, that function could disappear, and the Venus flytraps become just completely decorative and just sit there and photosynthesize. But then they become part of more like feathers on a peacock almost, which is a bit cool. Also a bit different from my initial concept. I think I want to make sure that the carnivorousness of them is still there. And so that might be something of making sure that your Venus flytraps are still functional. That might just be kind of like an eyesight thing of that is preferable. That is seen as a detriment if your Venus flytraps are no longer able to eat things. I think there might be I could make some cultural reasons that would keep the selective breeding of carnivorous plants, carnivorousness, alive. So we need. So one thing we need nutrient poor soil, and how that happens in at least the southeastern North Carolina is that it is in it's a lot of wetland area. There's a lot of sandy soils and similar things to that, and a lot of just wet areas that are just nutrient poor. This isn't to say that it's impossible to grow things there, because I mean that area used to have a lot of farmland. I say used to because a lot of it's becoming turned into shopping malls and such, for better or for worse. But it is still possible to grow stuff there. You have to be very careful, and very selective. The number of times my family tried to grow anything new in our backyard that wasn't already there and failed miserably. Whew. Way too many times to count. The number of failed gardens is quite high. Not always to the soil, but that definitely didn't help the matter. So some nearby land formations we can expect is wetlands, particularly. We can expect swamps, salt marshes, and I believe bogs or where actually the Venus flytraps grow. I could be slightly wrong on that, but essentially we're gonna have this conglomeration of these things of kind of how I envision it is that we're definitely a coastal-ish area. So we can even say coastal wetlands at that. And that being kind of protected by some barrier islands of varying sizes. Not quite Outer Banks large, I'm thinking. I am thinking more like Wrightsville Beach being the most obvious example that's coming to my mind, the beach I grew up next to. And Figure 8 Island and some of those sort of islands. So kind of you get these barrier islands protecting the mainland. Salt marshes creep up in that sound behind the barrier islands. And for those who don't know the terminology, let's say you have. Oh, yes, I do right here. One moment. Let me. This will help. Little visual display. So you have barrier islands crop up on the edges of mainlands, continents, etc. There's a lot of good work from Artifact Skin and others about how barrier islands form. But I will go into more of kind of just, I hope you can see this on the camera. If you have your ocean over here, pardon if my handwriting is atrocious. So you have your ocean over here. And then you get your barrier island, beautifully drawn as such. And then you have your mainland over here. Then this bit of water here is called the Sound. And these would be the inlets right here on either side of the island. But the Sound is going to be a calmer, used very loosely there, a calmer body of water than the ocean itself. It is still open water. It is something you do need to be careful in if you're swimming, but it is a calmer area. It is where you'll normally see boats stored. If you see a barrier island with a dock or piers, those docks and piers are going to be on the Sound side and not on the ocean side of that barrier island. So you'll see. So my idea is having salt marshes kind of creeping into this Sound area, and then from there, as you go further inland, that's when you start to get more into the bogs and the swamps. You get away from that. So the salt marshes keep the salt. As you get further in, it becomes more and more brackish, less and more fresher and fresher, until you eventually get into what's more officially swamp and bog area. As well as, of course, there's going to be dry land interspersed through all of this. This is not all just going to be one massive wetland for miles and miles on end. There's got to be land to walk on for these people, in my opinion. So, that's kind of the very rough idea of the layout of the land. I think at some point I do want to create a world map and kind of place these people on there. For now, that is a different scope than I want to work on at this particular moment. So going into all this, though, so if you have your swamps, your salt marshes, your bogs, your barrier islands, you kind of get some. We can now start to look at what food sources we have, what sort of vegetation, what sort of animal life we have, and also look at what are some of our livelihood, how our people are, at least early on. And some things I would assume from these people that they would be, so I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say these are not going to be the most agricultural of people. As I mentioned before, it is possible to farm in these areas. I have grown up not too far from farmlands that are only 4 miles from the ocean at most. You can farm these areas. That doesn't mean it's going to be the most viable, especially without terraforming or anything else like that. However, you do have other food sources that would be viable and other economic sources that would be viable for the area. So, for instance, fishing would be a huge way of making or filling a plate. Because between the salt marsh, you would have a lot of source of potential, and you could potentially have a lot of source of, I'm going to use our earth foods for a while here as we're talking. I plan on kind of making earth likes or even new things as we go into this world, but I'm going to use just as an idea of what sort of things we could have. Crabs and other shellfish will appear into the salt marsh. Not all of them will be worth eating because the salt marsh is a large estuary, and so a lot of baby animals there or new species are there, and so they're not necessarily the best to aim for as far as a diet, at least in my opinion. Certainly not the babies, but the new species, that's a slightly different story. But that does mean that there will be crabs roughly in the area. So crabbing is an option, fishing is an option. With an area like this, you would have some birds that you could always go hunting for. So you would have no end of easy meat in the area. Though or basic, simple meats are going to be abundant. Maybe not so much of the big game. You're not going to find so much of your, I don't know, bear or moose or anything else like that. But you are definitely going to have a lot of just basic sustenance, which is what we're aiming for right now. You would also have access to what was some of the other things I was thinking of earlier? Well, let's give me a moment to type in food sources. You would have fish, shellfish. Fish and shellfish, as well as I mentioned one other one. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, duck, seabirds, duck, pelican, etc. And it's possible that some of those could be migratory, so they may be more seasonal foods. But their eggs would also be something that could be farm food. Like shrimp, crab, oyster. Which I realize oysters are mollusks, but for this point, we get the point. Bird eggs. Insects, there's also no shortage of insects. So, I mean, that would be another source of nutrients for a diet. And these, of course, these are all animal sources. So if you go into more plant sources, things that you could expect to find, relatively speaking, we'll start with the non-plant and say mushrooms. Mushrooms will definitely be able to grow in an area, and do well, and potentially do well in these areas, as well as tree products. So I'm talking about nuts, and some nuts. Although, actually, let me back that up. Not nuts, and let me back off the tree products. So, well, actually, I bring up tree products because we'll go into economy with this. So the reason for tree products and carpentry being a large, or potentially a big economic source, besides fishing, is that since I still have this in mind of it being something like the Cape Fear region of North Carolina, then that means that pine trees are a huge resource in that area, and you have the potential for a huge lumber industry, particularly around shipbuilding, because from pine trees you can get turpentine and tar, as well as just pine lumber to build ships and other things. So you have both the trees to produce goods, as well as those same trees produce the needs to waterproof those goods, which in an area as wet as this would be hugely vital. Plus, with how fast pine trees grow, if it is very easy to keep those forests fresh and have a renewable source that you could trade with nearby areas very easily. So I am thinking we are going to be seeing skilled craftsmen and carpenters and shipbuilders coming out of this, and potentially a large port somewhere down the line, as the society evolves and grows. That's further down the line than we are right now. We're still in some of the proto stage and just figuring out the very bare bones basics of how this society is coming about and where they are. So you have fish, shrimp, crab, oyster, duck, pelican, seagull. That's the one bird that people. Ugh. I don't think we definitely don't need more seagulls in this world right now. So feel free to eat a seagull. Don't quote me on that. So bird eggs, insects, mushrooms, other things. You would probably want, as far as we'll probably want some type of root of some plant that you can get, as well as, oh, what is the other thing I was just thinking of that you would also want to be able to, other seeds, nuts, etc. Roots, seeds, nuts would be options. And this is where root, seeds, nuts, they're not stuff I particularly eat a whole lot, so I don't know what would grow where as far as those are concerned. A whole lot. Although I think nuts are more of a hardwood thing, and the trees I'm talking about are going to be mostly softwood, so I don't know how many nuts will actually be in this area. Backing up, though, you would have access to... and you would probably want some type... We're probably going to want some sort of leafy green plant that you can eat. I don't know how much of a spinach would grow in this sort of area, as well as, say, lettuce or arugula. I think that's a leafy green. I primarily eat spinach and lettuce as far as leafy greens are concerned. Cabbage. But you have signs. I'll probably want to just add a little bit something to the diet. Again, these are things I'll come back to a little bit, as I'll probably have to do some, not probably, I'm going to have to do some research into some of these things that would be of what would make sense in the area, what would create a relatively balanced diet, what would be likely to be eaten by people in this area, especially early on. I do know, I think that fruits and such will be rare, and they'll be more of a delicacy, something that's traded for with neighbors. So I do know that fruits in particular are going to be not native to the, or not largely native to this area, or very rare. Finding a blackberry bush or such would be particularly odd. You would have other options. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else I'm missing here on this front, or at least as far as diet's concerned. Well, here we are on Earth Day, a day to celebrate the Earth and preserving it, and here I am talking about eating everything on it. Oh, grains, that's the other type of food I was thinking about. It is possible that some grains could grow out here. It would likely... I don't think people would be actively farming those nearly as much as other items. I guess my intention, and also and the other thing is also non-food or non-dietary plants. So things like cotton and other flax and other fibrous plants and some of those. They could grow in the area, as historically cotton has grown in those areas. Again, I don't think farming is going to be the biggest focus of these people. As far as like the economy goes, they're going to be trading for most of those goods. It is possible that some things, like if there's a reed, go into the economy of. Reeds could potentially be farmed and harvested. Their benefits. So you could kind of get a basketry of both wicker and reed baskets. You could kind of get both of those forming as this, or being a huge part of this economy here. Let's actually go from tree products to lumber, shipbuilding, carpentry, reeds, basket making would be a large part of this. I don't know how much pottery would, because I haven't thought much about if there's a river nearby or not, or how accessible one would be. As much as I am kind of inclined to put a river in, or as much as I kind of want to put a river in there, I'm kind of inclined not to, just so I don't turn it into a Cape Fear clone. Because if I was to put a river in there, it would essentially be the Cape Fear River, and then I'm just recreating home. Not the worst thing. I mean, it would be realism, but I do want to try and explore some other alternatives, so that is one thing to keep in mind. So I don't know how much clay will be in the area, but you certainly will have, like I said, you'll have reeds, you'll have twigs and stuff to be able to do wicker. So you'll have some options there as for how a economy could form very easily with a lot of refined goods. Okay. I do know roots for sure will definitely be an option, because roots and bulbed vegetables could be another. Maybe? I also have to look on those. Right now we have a very meat-heavy diet, which definitely tells you what I tend to look at when I'm eating my food. That said, I don't eat many roots or mushrooms to begin with. I tend to eat a lot more vegetables and leafy greens, but I don't know where a lot of them come from. So that might be something I need to look into as well. So we got brain shape, and we have let's just look up marsh plants or wetland plants, as well as dietary plants. That is on my to research list. So, is there anything else to consider, or that I want to consider right now for these people, for these Venus flytrap-based humans? I did not add in pine forests. And the other thing specifically about softwood forests, and essentially evergreen forests as they are, but this is going to be pulling in from school knowledge and scout knowledge that I have not had to use in forever. If I recall correctly, the reason why there's particularly more softwoods than hardwood forests from where I grew up is partially because of that nutrient-poor soil of the hardwoods, and if I recall correctly, it's something with how their roots grow. Of the hardwoods, either don't go deep enough, quickly enough to get to the nutrients, to get past the sand and get down to the nutrients in the soil, where the nutrients actually are in the soil, or it's the fact that the softwoods in the area just learn to grow quicker. Pine trees grow rather rapidly, as opposed to a hardwood tree. And because of the storms that hit our area frequently, hurricanes, namely, that even if the pine woods fall over, that they are more likely, they will have an easier time growing back up than a hardwood because of just their rapid growth rate. And so I feel like some of those may not be true facts. Do not quote me on that. Please do your own research if you are really trying to figure that out. This is stuff I'm trying to remember from when I was in school. Elementary school, namely, and middle school, because that's when a lot of this was talked about. And on a few scout trips when I was in Cub Scouts. But otherwise, so yes, softwood forests, sandy softwood forests, which are never fun to hike through, but that's also a different story. Yeah, some barrier islands, a lot of coastal wetlands, a lot of sandy forested area. And that's kind of the makeup I'm imagining in this area. A lot like home. A lot like home. And I might look into some ways that we could geographically change that up. Like I said, I'm probably, we'll say there's no major river nearby. At least very close to this area. Or if there are rivers nearby, they're either quite small or they are distinctly in they're in less swampier areas than at least the homeland of these people. So they'd be kind of either somewhere else than here. I think that this makes for a good stopping point today. We're at about an hour on how long we've been going today. So I think this makes a good stopping point. To everyone who joined me, and also not a hot chocolate, so that makes for a great stopping point. Thank you for everyone who joined me today. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'd love to hear them. Or if you have any ideas as well. I'm always open to hearing ideas and such. My current plan is I will see you all again this time next Thursday, unless I get scheduled for work in the evenings, in which case I will move the schedule to be at 11 o'clock a.m. on next Thursday, which I believe is the calendar, the 29th. So you can expect to see me again then. And until then, I hope that you all are having a good time. Please let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions for this project I'm working on. And thank you for joining in. And goodbye.